Hi everyone, this is Sean Power, and this is my week 4 presentation for my PTR class at Full Sail with Dr. Nourredine. This week I'll be going over a data patterns solution for my capstone company T-Mobile, a little bit about what we'll be discussing, the historical stock analysis for T-Mobile, which we covered a bit in week 3, some of the trends and patterns we analyzed, how to calculate the value of T-Mobile's data, the different types of correlations we can look at, and we'll conclude with a SWOT analysis for the company. So the next slide is going to be a 2-year stock analysis. Again, some of this data is from week 3. This graphic, however, in the center of the slide is a new graphic where I've tried to find some correlations between the data, different types of data here. In the light blue, you have the customers in millions. In dark blue, you have the average closing price of the stock. In orange, you have a line which shows CapEx quarter over quarter. And in purple, you have revenue in billions. Both CapEx and revenue are in billions. One thing I wanted to find out was if there was a correlation between the average closing value of the stock and CapEx, and you can see there is a positive correlation, but it's not a very strong correlation. There's a stronger correlation between the average closing price of the stock and how many customers T-Mobile seems to gain quarter over quarter. There's a 0.83 correlation. You can see there is a jump in revenue in quarter 1, right when the purple line starts to pick up. One thing to discuss is during a quarter 1 2020 earnings call, the president of technology at T-Mobile, Neville Ray, announced plans to spend $60 billion in CapEx, and you can see that CapEx spend starting to increase in quarter 1 of 2021. It's that peak on the orange line. There's a large $12 billion expenditure in CapEx. And then you can also see the dark blue line. There is an increase quarter over quarter in the value of T-Mobile stock ever since they announced and successfully completed the merger or acquisition of Sprint, as well as quarter over quarter customer gains in the light blue bar or column. So there is correlation. It obviously might not be causation for investors to be willing to spend more on T-Mobile stock. Just the fact that the customer base of T-Mobile seems to increase. However, over the course of the last 2 years, there is a steady increase in both revenue and customer gain. Those two we can anticipate are correlated. T-Mobile stock is also trading at a 2-year high. The quarter 2 average value of the stock was $139, a little over $139 a share. On the next slide, I wanted to discuss the types of correlation. Obviously, the correlation that I used was a temporal correlation, which is comparing variables that are measured over time. We also can look at spatial correlation between variables that are measured using distance. An example of that might be the variability between T-Mobile locations or T-Mobile customers spread out over the United States, over the continental United States. The other thing I wanted to talk about was coincidence. And we can try to remove coincidence when we're doing a correlation analysis by looking at related variables. So on the previous slide, for example, we're looking at variables that are measured or we can assume are correlated, one being the number of customers and the revenue. Those two are correlated. However, there might not be correlation between the stock price and the number of customers, or the stock price and how much the company is spending on CapEx. Obviously, those are both financial metrics, so there is correlation between how investors are going to interpret the company's performance and what their outlook is on the value of the T-Mobile stock. So using unrelated variables, however, we can look at other trends and patterns and help to bring more data in to reference when we make decisions, um, which I will talk about on the social side. We will go over some of the social media patterns that have occurred in the last couple of months. This slide here goes over trends and patterns. So this visual here shows there is a correlation between revenue and the average stock price, which we already determined. This is looking at correlation year over year, not quarter over quarter. We know that T-Mobile also has a strong price per earnings ratio. It's actually the strongest in the industry. So that indicates that there's a higher earnings multiple. Therefore, T-Mobile investors are going to spend a little more on T-Mobile stock in comparison to Verizon and AT&T stock. However, they're putting a heavier value on the company, and they're getting that from a few different variables. So there's not enough data points for us to do any sort of clustering. For clustering, we need a wider data range, and we would need a couple of different variables, not simply just revenue numbers. We would need to look at a few data points. One example would be potentially to look at a cluster of T-Mobile's customer base. We can see how those customers spend on T-Mobile services. Another thing we can look at, we can interpret trends and patterns on is the T-Mobile stock and where it's heading in the future. As mentioned in week 3, we did see a decline this quarter in the daily trade. The value of T-Mobile stock is showing a slight decline, and we recommended for investors to hold their stock. However, we do anticipate, just with the trajectory of the company and their 5G growth and how they play amongst others in the industry, that the value should rebound. So the next thing I want to look at is social. And on this slide here, I have a dashboard, which is a social media analytics tool called Brand24. And using the keyword T-Mobile and putting in a couple of other parameters, such as our ability to remove mentions of things that might have T-Mobile but aren't related to T-Mobile's wireless service. They do own an arena in Canada, and I apologize, not Canada, in Las Vegas. And we don't want to obviously take into consideration any negative sentiment surrounding the mentions of the arena. So I was able to look at who is mentioning T-Mobile, what their influence is over their audience, and what their reach is. I was taking a couple of points here that I put on the left-hand side of this slide, just based on those influencers that have larger reach. Some things on the web, such as articles showing less interest in 5G potentially from consumers. Another thing in recent months, August, there was a data breach. T-Mobile had about 50 million customers impacted by that data breach. There's also positive sentiment towards a new partnership with Walmart, where T-Mobile plans to open about 2,300 T-Mobile stores within Walmart, and that should help them to increase their rural reach. The next slide, I have the value of data. A couple things to help us interpret the value of data. Firstly, understanding data from the acquisition of Sprint, so there was a value to that data. T-Mobile US also discloses their goodwill and intangible assets for 2020. That was about $16.4 billion. There's also a value of the T-Mobile systems, so all of the tools and systems that they use for customer relationship management, their billing systems. So there's a cost to that IT and network management, as well as security investments, things that will help prevent any future data breaches. And then there's the cost of collecting customer data. So there's an hourly cost. There's also systems. I mentioned CRMs. And then the customer satisfaction, that's also another intangible item when it comes to customer acquisition. When customers interact with your brand, when they go to the T-Mobile website and they try to subscribe to new service, how easy is that for the customer? There is a value to that as well. So in conclusion, and on my last slide here, just a high-level SWOT analysis of the T-Mobile brand. Some strengths in the upper left quadrant. They continue to strive in the area of customer service. They are awarded the J.D. Power Award for Customer Service year over year. Their spectrum also covers 100% of the continental U.S. That's one thing that helps to strengthen their competitiveness with the other two large wireless providers. A weakness, that data breach, unfortunately, with stealing data from 50 million customers is unfortunately a weakness. They'll have to do some work in securing that data. Some opportunities, they just announced a program where they will provide 5G internet access for homes. Right now, there's about 100 million homes in the US that have subscribed to that service. So that's an opportunity for them if they can continue to build out that offering. And threats, just a typical threat for any telecom service provider in the US is the FCC regulation concerning spectrum, concerning the ownership and purchasing of spectrum. Being that that's heavily regulated, T-Mobile can face a lot of risk in the spectrum that they own and potentially future spectrum that they're looking to buy. And that concludes my presentation for this week. I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.